another edition of Soul School. I'm Calvin Lincoln, and tonight on Soul School, a remembrance of the one and only Maurice White of Earth, Wind & Fire. I'm sure that everybody has found out by now that he's passed on. And when you get a disturbance in the force like that, in the musical force, music is never ever the same. I mean, that career from the beginning of him being in Memphis and being best friends with Booker T from Booker T and the MGs, who would also go on to have a great career for himself. And by the way, I think Booker T actually lives up here in the Bay Area in a place called Tiburon. But I started thinking about all that kind of stuff, and David Porter and Mecca into Chicago, and basically stopping in the music conservatory, hanging out with Louis Satterfield. Next thing you know, he's over at Chess. And Billy Stewart, all those great records like I Do Love You, Summertime, Sitting in the Park, and even beyond all of that, gigging downtown at those jazz clubs. Matter of fact, him, as well as Marshall Thompson from Marshall and the Shy-Lights, who was a jazz drummer at that time, those were two of the blacks that would actually be downtown Chicago doing those jazz gigs or whatever. And it's just really amazing, you know, moonlighting and running with all the just different great Chicago musicians like Morris Jennings, who's with the Curtis Mayfield Experience, Donny Hathaway. All of them were actually really running around and doing things. You know, some sessions over at Kurt Tom, OK Records. It was a hell of a time period, and this is all stuff before that preceded Earth, Wind & Fire. But, you know, when you start thinking about where he was on the spiritual tip and the social overtones, Kool and the Gang kind of had that vibe too. This was early on, pre-Wild and Peaceful, you know, right before Who's Gonna Take the Weight in Chocolate Buttermilk and things like that. But outside of Kool and the Gang, wasn't nobody else even really thinking like that. And you go from looking at an astrological chart, Earth, Air, and Fire, to Earth, Wind, and Fire, and it's pretty deep when you start thinking about that. And even before that, you know, like I said, I could get into the albums. We all know the albums: Earth, Wind & Fire, The Need of Love, Last Days and Times, Head to the Sky, Open Our Eyes, Way of the World. I mean, we know all of that stuff, but I would much rather hit you with stuff that you really may not have tripped off of. Not that you don't know it, but you really didn't trip off of. Like, you know, perfect example is this album here, If You Will Bear With Me. This is a group called Rotary Connection. I don't know if you guys are really hip to this, but this is a group that Minnie Ripperton was a part of, and Maurice White played drums on probably 2 or 3 of the albums, and he gigged with them on the road, him and Charles Stepheny. And this is all stuff that preceded Earth, Wind & Fire. And you guys all know how bad Minnie Ripperton was, but it's just amazing, like I say, when you start thinking about the work that cat did that you may not necessarily trip about because it's not really put out there like that. But Rotary Connection, Earth, Wind & Fire, is just really amazing. And even deeper than that, one of his greatest friends in the world, If You Could Bear With Me Once Again, this is an album from 1968 called Maiden Voyage. And Maurice White was gigging with Ramsey Lewis at this time, and this is one of the baddest albums that Ramsey has ever done. You know, this was in 68, and this is all preceding Earth, Wind & Fire, and you can see the concept of Earth, Wind & Fire evolving from albums like this, because the jam, the track itself, Maiden Voyage, was a remake of an old classic Herbie Hancock song that was done way back in the day, that was later also cut back then with help from Herbie Hancock on Bobby Hutcherson's Happenings LP. The track itself, Maiden Voyage, but the version that's actually on the album that I just showed you has vocal work, you know, a lot of just different things that you would kind of hear go into Earth, Wind & Fire a little bit later on. And it's no secret that Ramsey Lewis and Maurice White clicked the way that they did, much like him and Charles Stepheny. And speaking on Ramsey Lewis too, you might want to keep that brother on your prayer list, because his son, not too long ago, Kevin Lewis, who was the MD musical director over at Death Row Records, and he used to really be responsible for hiring a lot of musicians that actually can't get a lot of work now in LA no more, because not only is Death Row Records defunct, but he's no longer with us, and he was a great musician in his own right. So when you start talking about Maurice White, it encompasses a lot of other stuff outside of Earth, Wind & Fire. You know, I mean, we don't know from the personal insight because he obviously was a private cat, but just his works alone, don't pigeonhole him into just Earth, Wind & Fire, which is perhaps one of the greatest 2 or 3 groups, if not greatest groups of all time. But think about all the stuff that he did that was outside with the emotions with Denise Williams and, just different stuff, his brother Verdine and Pockets and things like that or whatever. And matter of fact, I want to take you out of here with something that you wouldn't expect. Let's get into some music from one of his great friends, speaking on Ramsey Lewis, who I just showed you from the Maiden Voyage LP. This is Ramsey Lewis, and like I say, I always like to do things differently. I could easily show you some Earth, Wind & Fire video, but I would much rather you get a vibe on his friends and just people that also are hurting much like what we are. Let's get to that, and I'll see you guys all next time.
Yeah, he's funky on, Bubba. And ha! And isn't she lovely? And on and on and on and on. The history is right here with Soul School Television. And I'm Shock G from the Digital Underground. And Humphrey says hello.